Have you ever noticed that the people who suffer the most are almost always the ones who feel the most? That the most emotional end up being the first to be manipulated, deceived, and discarded? Machiavelli would understand this better than anyone. He knew that the world doesn't reward the sincere. It rewards those who know when to appear sincere. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that emotion is a dangerous weapon, especially when it's in the wrong hands. How many times have you given too much of yourself, spoken your heart, trusted someone who didn't deserve it, and left bleeding inside? Yes, it is. This is the trap of the soul, believing that feeling is always a virtue, when in fact it can be a sentence. The end justifies the means, and sometimes the means is silence, coldness, pause, a neutral gaze. These are the invisible shields of those who have learned not to be manipulated by their own hearts. Machiavelli would say, it is better to be feared than loved, and when it comes to emotions, that's literally true. Those who fear their own impulsiveness learn to respect the power of control. The world belongs to those who can keep a cool head while everyone else burns. In a game driven by vanity, appearances, and desire, self-control is the only form of true freedom. But here's the paradox. Not feeling doesn't mean being empty. It means choosing what to feel. It's the calculated use of emotional strength. It's understanding that anger can be fuel, fear can be prudence, and detachment can be power. Emotions are soldiers. The mistake is to leave them uncontrolled. Once you learn to command them, no one else can command you. And that's what separates the strong from the weak, the strategists from the naive. Machiavelli wasn't just talking about politics, he was talking about the human soul. And if the prince must dominate the state, the individual must dominate his own heart. The enemy is not the one who provokes you, it is what awakens within you when provoked. True power lies not in retaliation, but in observation. It lies not in feeling everything, but in deciding what is worth feeling. Self-control is the most subtle form of sovereignty. So, before being betrayed by emotion, learn to tame it. Before reacting, understand. Before feeling too much, realize who is profiting from your imbalance. The art of not feeling everything is, in fact, the art of feeling wisely. And it is at this boundary between reason and instinct that true power begins. The power of not being a slave to your own heart. There's a kind of silence that isn't weakness, it's calculation. When someone chooses not to feel in the face of provocation, what appears to be apathy is actually disciplined power. Machiavelli taught that politics should be guided by reality, not ideals. And the same is true of the emotional realm. People react impulsively to what hurts them, but those who observe before reacting master the rhythm of the game. Not feeling sometimes is feeling intelligently. It's the deliberate choice not to be manipulated by the heat of the moment. Think of a leader who remains calm when everything around them collapses. While others drown in panic, they see the cracks in the chaos and make the decisions that put them one step ahead. The ability to contain an emotion isn't natural coldness. It's virtue in the Machiavellian sense, an inner strength that controls instincts to use them at the right time. In a world where everyone strives to appear virtuous, those who understand the calculated use of emotional strength create a magnetic contrast. It's like a general who knows the storm but waits for the exact moment to strike, because he understands that fortune, luck, favors the prepared. Suppressing the immediate impulse isn't denying what you feel, it's choosing when to feel it. A restrained look, a pause before responding, a silence that weighs more than 1,000 words. These are subtle weapons of emotional power that disarm any attempt at manipulation. Take, for example, the realm of personal relationships. While many try to win an argument by raising their voice, the strategist observes and adapts. They know that those who lose control of their emotions surrender the throne of influence. The end justifies the means, not in the cruel sense, but in the strategic sense. If the goal is to preserve one's stability and avoid being hated, sometimes containing an emotion is the most effective means. It's like a chess player who sacrifices a piece not out of weakness, but because they anticipate checkmate. Those who dominate their own internal field inevitably command the external. Of course, there's a risk to this practice. Many confuse not feeling with becoming stone. But the secret lies elsewhere, feeling everything and still choosing what to show. The appearance of virtue may be necessary, but true mastery comes from understanding that emotion is a tool, not a master. Those who understand this are feared, not for being cruel, but for being unpredictable. No one knows what moves them, what affects them, what unbalances them. And this, in the game of life, is pure power. Being imperturbable is one of the highest forms of silent influence. And perhaps what Machiavelli was trying to say between the lines is that controlling the heart is more difficult than conquering a kingdom. Because the most cunning enemy isn't outside, it's within. Emotion is an army that, if left untrained, can turn against the king himself. And that's why those who wish to control the world must first learn not to be controlled by themselves. After all, the line between feeling and succumbing is tenuous, and that's precisely where the art of transforming inner control into outer power begins. The world is a mirror that reflects the inner state of those who observe it. Machiavelli, if he were alive today, might say that those who govern themselves govern their surroundings. Politics guided by reality begins within, in the invisible realm of emotions. It's futile to try to dominate people, situations, or outcomes if one's own heart is a republic at war. When one learns to contain anger, anxiety, or fear, one not only changes one's energy, but also changes the way the world reacts to it. Those who speak calmly amid chaos alter the frequency of everyone around them, and that is power. It's no coincidence that history's greatest leaders seemed unshakable. They understood that external command arises from inner serenity. This mastery isn't a mystical gift, it's training. Just as an army only obeys after discipline, the body and mind also need command. The calculated use of force begins with what you think and feel. If true human nature is unstable, the strategy is to create stability by choice, not by chance. This is why emotionally stable people intimidate. They don't engage in the game of provocation. An insult doesn't move them, a loss doesn't define them. And when the other realizes they can't control you, they change their behavior. This is pure influence. No shouting, no imposition, just firm presence. Strength that doesn't need to be proven is the most respected. In practice, this means that each emotion is a territory to be managed. Do you want power over circumstances? Start by organizing your inner empire. A simple example: when you feel anger, instead of reacting, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what really threatens me here? This question cuts through the animal instinct and awakens the strategist. It is in this interval of consciousness that the course of the battle is decided. Mastering impulse is what separates the politician from the impulsive. And in Machiavelli's world, what decides who wins is not who feels more, but who acts based on what they understand, not what explodes. There's also a more subtle side. Inner control creates an aura. People sense when someone is in command. The tone of voice is different. The gaze is steady. The rhythm is constant. This is why serene leaders inspire more obedience than noisy tyrants. Virtue is that silent magnetic force born of self-control. Fortune, luck, smiles on those who hold the helm steady even in the most violent waves. And those who understand this realize that power isn't something you take, it's something you attract. Ultimately, controlling the world is an illusion, but controlling how you react to it is an art. and all art requires practice, patience, and purpose. Self-control is the invisible foundation of all lasting influence, and it is precisely this inner mastery that opens the door to applying Machiavelli's lessons to personal relationships, where power ceases to be political and becomes emotional. Do you realize that Machiavelli's ideas are not limited to politics? They permeate the invisible corridors of human relationships. After all, the most complex power is not that of a king over his people, but that of an individual over his own connections. The end justifies the means. In a relationship, this doesn't mean manipulating, but understanding that to maintain balance and respect, one must act strategically, not naively. People are driven by self-interest, fear, or admiration, and those who understand this true human nature avoid the illusions of emotional idealism. That's why Machiavelli would say, love, but maintain control. Because in love, friendship, or work, those who lose emotional control lose the throne. Applying Machiavelli to relationships means learning to use virtue, rational strength, to deal with fortune, emotional chance. There are times when being kind is a tactic, not a weakness. Other times, silence is worth more than 1,000 explanations. It's politics guided by reality, not romantic ideals. People aren't driven solely by kindness. They're driven by need, vanity, fear, and desire. Knowing this is liberating, because by understanding what moves the other, you stop being a pawn and become a player. This doesn't mean manipulating, it means seeing. And those who see deeply dominate the board without having to raise their voice. Consider a team leader, for example. They know that not everyone is motivated in the same way. Some need public recognition, others freedom, and still others only function under pressure. The emotional Machiavellian understands this. They use calculated force wisely. They praise when appropriate, silence when useful, and impose limits when necessary. They avoid being hated, but they also don't strive to be loved. They prefer to be respected. Because respect breeds loyalty, and loyal, self-contained armies, as Machiavelli said, are the only ones that truly win battles. In romantic relationships, the same applies. Many lose themselves trying to please, believing that love is servitude. Machiavelli would teach the opposite. Love without power is submission. Those who are emotionally dependent on others become vulnerable. Therefore, balance lies in loving consciously, not blindly. It is necessary to understand when to show vulnerability and when to don the armor of prudence. Power lies not in being cold, but in being lucid. Knowing when to act with heart and when with calculation is the secret to relationships that don't become unhealthy. And it is at this point that emotional distancing enters as a refined art, not as an absence of feeling, but as a protection of one's very essence. Because if power in relationships arises from balance, it is in controlling distance that command is maintained. The next step, therefore, is to understand how strategic distancing can be both a shield and a sword in the realm of emotions. Some people mistake emotional detachment for coldness, but Machiavelli would see it as one of the greatest displays of strategic intelligence. In a world where everyone is trapped by their own passions, those who maintain distance dominate the board. Detachment is not indifference, it is defense. It is politics guided by reality applied to the soul. By taking a step back, the mind sees the whole field, and only those who see from the outside understand the game from within. Just as a prince cannot allow himself to be dominated by his affections, the individual who desires stability cannot be a slave to the emotions of others. The end justifies the means, and sometimes the means is simply not to react. Detachment is a form of psychological survival. When someone doesn't know how to distance themselves, they live at the mercy of others' moods and end up becoming a pawn, not a player. Machiavelli taught that a prudent ruler must observe what moves them and what weakens them. In the realm of emotions, this means recognizing which people, environments, or situations drain you. The calculated use of force in this case is knowing where not to deploy it. And this skill isn't born of apathy, but of awareness. It's choosing not to fight wars that don't deserve your energy. Instead of trying to convince, prove, or insist, the strategist observes, measures, and steps away when the emotional cost outweighs the psychological gain. But distance, when used well, doesn't just protect, it also empowers. Because by not reacting, you become unpredictable. Those who don't reveal themselves command the mystery. And those who command the mystery command the narrative. Machiavelli would say that it's better to be feared than loved, and this fear stems precisely from uncertainty. The other never knows what affects you, what irritates you, what hurts you. In a world where everyone exposes everything, secrecy is a throne. Distance creates scarcity, and scarcity is influence. It's the principle of fortune. Those who reveal themselves too much lose their value. Those who appear at the right time become events. Consider the example of great modern strategists, leaders, negotiators, or even emotionally balanced people. They all possess the same skill. They know when to approach and when to retreat. They master the rhythm of relationships, like a conductor who controls the orchestra with the simple raise of an eyebrow. It's a kind of power that doesn't shout. It vibrates in silence. The right distance transforms respect into curiosity, and curiosity into power. When the other feels your absence, they feel the weight of your presence. This is the invisible game of emotional influence, and few realize that true control comes from those who know when to disappear. Still, there's a price to pay. Every warrior who masters the art of detachment must deal with the emptiness it creates. And it's at this point that power and loneliness collide, where the balance between empathy and coldness becomes an ethical and human dilemma. The line between protection and isolation is thin, and those who cross it too far risk losing something essential, their own sensitivity. But this is a theme Machiavelli would understand well, and it leads us directly to the next question. When is it necessary to be sensitive, and when is it better to be cold? Few internal battles are as silent as this, feeling too much and losing focus, or feeling too little and losing one's soul. Machiavelli, with his pragmatic view of human nature, might have said that empathy is a luxury that power can rarely afford. But he would also have understood that without a modicum of sensitivity, the leader becomes a tyrant and the individual stone. Balance lies at the center, where virtue meets fortune. Being sensitive enough to understand people, but cool enough not to be dominated by them. It is this dance between heart and calculation that defines those who command their own destiny. Politics guided by reality does not exclude emotion. It merely places it under command. The problem is that most people live in extremes. Some lose themselves in excessive empathy, trying to heal the world while bleeding in silence. Others build emotional walls so thick that they become incapable of feeling any real connection. Both stances are weaknesses disguised as virtue. The appearance of virtue, in fact, is one of the most subtle traps. Appearing good is not the same as being effective. The end justifies the means, and the means in this case is finding a point where kindness doesn't make you vulnerable and coldness doesn't dehumanize you. Those who master this axis understand that emotion and reason are not enemies, but complementary forces. There are times when empathy is the most powerful weapon. A genuine act of listening can disarm an enemy more effectively than 1,000 arguments. The strategist understands that empathy, used at the right time, builds trust. And trust is influence. But there are also times when coldness is necessary, especially when the heart begins to sabotage reason. Machiavelli would say, "Avoid being hated, but do not seek to be loved." Emotional balance is what prevents love from becoming dependency and compassion from becoming weakness. Knowing when to harden and when to yield is the true art of emotional prudence. Sensitivity, when mature, ceases to be vulnerability and becomes a radar. It allows us to perceive the unsaid, the hidden intentions, the play behind words. Coldness, however, prevents this radar from overloading the system. It's like a general who listens to the sounds of the field but doesn't allow himself to be paralyzed by them. This is virtue in action, feeling deeply and yet deciding rationally. A modern example of this is the good negotiator. He listens empathetically, understands the other person's pain, but maintains a sharp mind and a neutral face. This blend of presence and control is what makes him irresistible and, at the same time, respected. But every coin has two sides. Those who become too accustomed to efficiency can lose their tenderness, and those who give in too much to sensitivity can lose their bearings. The solution isn't to choose a side, it's to learn to change temperature as the environment demands. There are times for heat and times for ice. Knowing how to alternate between the two is what separates the wise from the impulsive. And it is precisely in this alternation that the next tension arises, the internal cost of this stance, because remaining too imperturbable exacts a price. And that price isn't always visible from the outside. All power exacts a price, and power over oneself is perhaps the most costly of all. When someone adopts an imperturbable, seemingly unshakable stance, they are waging a silent war within themselves. Machiavelli would understand this well. Politics guided by reality demands sacrifice. The end justifies the means, but what if the means is one's own soul? In the long run, emotional detachment and calculated coldness can breed something dangerous, a kind of moral anesthesia. The person ceases to feel not only what hurts them, but also what makes them human. They begin to act as if emotions were weaknesses to be exterminated, not compasses to be interpreted. This is the point where the strategist risks becoming a prisoner of their own armor. The psychological price of this suppression is high. By avoiding pain, one also avoids pleasure. By silencing fear, one silences courage. True human nature is paradoxical. It needs contrast to understand itself. When someone tries to eliminate negative emotions, they end up flattening the entire emotional experience. It's as if life loses color. The appearance of virtue remains, the face remains serene, but inside, everything becomes lukewarm. Loneliness sets in, not because there is a lack of people, but because there is a lack of connection. And without connection, power loses its meaning. Machiavelli would say that the isolated ruler is vulnerable because no one fights for someone who does not arouse loyalty. And in the emotional realm, loyalty is born of affection, not fear. This is where ethics comes into play. To what extent is it moral to control one's emotions to the point of no longer feeling anything? The calculated use of emotional strength, when taken to the extreme, becomes inhumanity disguised as wisdom. One must avoid being hated, even by oneself. Many who seek impenetrable end up creating internal repulsion, a silent rejection of their own fragility. But fragility is not weakness. It is the reminder that there is still something alive within. Denying this is like closing the doors of a castle and forgetting that air also needs to enter. Yet there is a tragic beauty in this process. The individual who learns to master their own emotional chaos lives in a rare state of clarity, but pays with the loneliness of those who see too much. They understand the game of human nature, but sometimes miss being just human. Virtue, when not balanced by fortune, hardens the heart. and what was once power becomes exile. It's the paradox of absolute self-control. The more you conquer yourself, the further you become from who you once were. And few have the courage to admit that deep down, the price of serenity is the loss of part of the soul. But there is a way out. The same mind that learns to close itself off can learn to open itself up. With awareness, not naive vulnerability. It's possible to maintain control without losing touch with your essence. And this is where practical strategies of emotional self-control come in. Those that allow you to use emotions as energy, not as a prison. The next step is to learn not to eliminate feeling, but to convert it into strength. Controlling emotions isn't about extinguishing them, it's about directing them. Machiavelli would say that a wise prince doesn't destroy his inner armies, but disciplines them. Anger, fear, sadness, all have a function. They are soldiers of the psyche, and the mistake lies in leaving them uncontrolled. The end justifies the means, and here the means is self-control. One of the first strategies is the ritual of the pause. Before reacting, breathe, literally. The pause is the sword of self-control, a cut between impulse and decision. Instead of responding to the offense, observe what it triggers. This observation transforms emotion into information. The strategist who masters the time between stimulus and response gains a brutal advantage. He decides clearly, while others are still blinded by their own anger. Another technique is what Machiavelli would call training the appearance of virtue. It's not about falsehood, but about psychological strategy. In moments of tension, maintain a calm countenance, a straight posture, and a steady gaze. Even if there's turmoil inside, a serene exterior disarms adversaries and calms the atmosphere. Power lies not in shouting, but in inspiring confidence through silence. Emotionally balanced people project stability, and stability is magnetic. Try this in everyday situations: an argument at work, a family conflict, a romantic crisis. Speak less, breathe more, look people in the eye. Apparent serenity is the most effective form of armor. The second step is to learn the calculated use of emotional strength. Instead of trying to eliminate feelings, channel them. Transform anger into focus, fear into prudence, sadness into introspection. Every emotion has a hidden purpose. Machiavelli would teach that the wise prince uses even weakness as a weapon. When anxiety arises, for example, transform it into practical action. Exercise, organize tasks, create structure. Repressed emotions become chaos. Channeled emotions become virtue. And virtue is what allows us to navigate the unpredictable tides of fortune without losing our way. Another method is strategic self-questioning. When feeling emotionally shaken, ask yourself, does this reaction serve me or sabotage me? This simple question breaks the emotional trance. It restores reason to command. Self-control isn't repression, it's a conscious choice. If you're angry with someone, ask yourself if it's worth wasting your energy on it. If you feel jealous, investigate what's really behind it: fear of loss or a need for control. This kind of introspection makes the mind political. It observes before deciding, ponders before acting. And this prudence is what separates the wise from the impulsive. Finally, there is the strategy of constant adaptation. Life is fluid, and those who try to maintain absolute control will eventually break. Politics guided by reality is flexible, and so must emotional control. There will be days when you need to toughen up, others when sensitivity will be your trump card. The secret lies in adjusting your internal temperature as the playing field changes. Just as Machiavelli advised the prince to adapt to fortune, the individual must adapt to emotion. Mastering oneself isn't about remaining static, it's about moving with awareness. And it is precisely this malleability that transforms self-control into real power, paving the way for complete mastery of mind and destiny. What would you do if, from this day forward, no one could knock you off balance? Imagine responding to chaos with silence, to provocation with presence, to manipulation with clarity. This is true power, the kind that doesn't need to be proven. Machiavelli didn't write about emotions, but he wrote about mastery. And the noblest mastery is that of one who rules one's own inner empire. You can't control fortune, but you can control your reaction to it. And that's precisely where life changes, when emotion stops being the executioner and becomes the servant. Ask yourself, how many times have you been betrayed by your feelings? How many decisions have you made in the heat of the moment and later regretted? How many times has someone controlled you simply by knowing where to push the right button within you? As long as you're hostage to your own emotions, anyone with a little cunning will be your ruler. The end justifies the means, and the means, in this case, is self-control. From the moment you decide that no one can take you off center, everything changes. People, situations, and even fate begin to bend to your balance. But be careful. Self-control isn't coldness, it's freedom. It's looking within and realizing that there's a throne waiting for your command. No matter what the world says, what destroys you isn't what happens outside, but what you allow to happen inside. If you learn to command the storms of your soul, no fortune can bring you down. The game changes when you stop reacting and start choosing. Now tell me, will you continue to be a slave to your feelings, or will you learn to use each emotion as a weapon? Will you continue to hand over power to the first person who angers you, or will you become the strategist who observes before acting? Machiavelli would say that power belongs to the lucid, and the lucid person is the one who feels but does not lose himself in feeling. So if something has awakened within you, don't waste this call. Start practicing silence, pausing, breathing before reacting. Transform your mind into your most loyal army. And if you want to continue learning to master the invisible, your ego, your fear, your emotions, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The next video could be the final blow to the enemy within you.